Bullying, a topic that I'm sure all of us have dealt with. Anybody know somebody, or have you ever been bullied? Show of hands. I figure pretty much all of us either knows or have been at one point. I'd like to introduce some of the people we have here, some of the experts who are going to be helping us out today. First of all, head of upper school at Lawrence School, Jason Culp. You can clap for him. He deserves it. A mom who has joined us with some experience in this, Jill Zupan. Dr. Carolyn Ievers-Landis, a PhD, who's going to be talking about some issues that have to do with psychology and psychiatry, correct? And Dr. Lisa DeMoore, who is, and I just met Lisa tonight, so I'm learning more about her. She's the director for the Center for Research for Girls at Laurel School. I'm going to kind of go around and have them tell you why they're here, what they're going to be speaking about, some of their expertise. So we'll give you a couple minutes. Jason, if you'd like to start.
Good evening, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here tonight. When we were doing our pre-panel meeting, Lisa said to us that we're not helpless against bullying, and that is true. And that's the message I want to share with you tonight, and I think that all of us want to share with you, is that it is not a helpless situation. It is not something that cannot be addressed successfully. And so from a school perspective, I will often hear that schools are not doing enough or schools are not addressing it in the way that they should. And so what I want to share with you is some of the efforts that schools have made and can make in order to make a real difference in the incidence of bullying and relational aggression on school campuses. I think it's also important to note, though, when you're talking about the difference that schools can make, that schools can't do that independently. It is a community effort. It is a family effort. It is parents and children around the dinner table setting norms against that behavior and then carrying that to larger groups in the community and carrying that into the school. And that all together, much as was talked about on the video, changes can be made to ensure the emotional and physical safety of all of our students.
Jill.
Great. That was beautiful, Jason. I'm Jill Zupan, director of the Attention Center. And I let Stephanie know that my son was a school bully, and I had no idea. I came to find out when I had come to a new school. We had come to Sugar Falls, and when I arrived there, they had asked me to be a part of this Peaceful Schools committee that they had, and it was kind of a subcommittee of the PTO to promote peace and kindness. And I was a middle school rep, which my son was in the middle school. And we did all kinds of crazy peace and kindness activities. We were attack dogs on peace and kindness. And all the while, I had no idea that my son had a second life, actually. And I found out in my own family room when we wanted to hold a talk on bullying. We had a corporate psychologist that had a conversation with me that told me that when she goes into the corporate world, she can tell who has been the bully, who has been bullied, and who is the bystander, the 3 Bs. And I said, that's really important for us to know, because we're always worried about what's going to happen to our kids down the road. So I said, I think we should have you speak to the school. But Chagrin wouldn't let us use any of their facilities because they didn't have a bullying problem. And so I opened up my home to, I was able to fit about 86 women in there. We took out all the furniture, and she stood up at the fireplace, and we just had chairs everywhere. And then she started to recite a list of characteristics of a bully, that you might have a bully at home. And I had seen a zillion of those lists because I was on the Peaceful Schools Committee, so I had read everything that I could possibly imagine. But she had a list that was her own. And when she hit number 4, that is when I realized that I had a bully. When meanwhile, all the time, my son had been telling me that he had been bullied because he was new from another school and didn't fit in, and there was just little problems here and there. And all she said was, does your child always insist on taking the bus? Never wants to be driven to school, which is kind of a strange point, but that's exactly what was happening in our house, because that was my son's office. And sometimes it'd say, you could sleep in for a little bit, and I'll take you in about a half hour or 45 minutes, and he'd race, like, did the bus leave? And I'd like, what a great kid. he doesn't want me to have to drive him to school. He's such a good boy. And I stood up, like as if I had, it was just like a reflex. I stood up. And she was going on with all these other numbers. And I just stood up and I said, in front of all these people, in my own family room, I said, I think my son is a bully. And another mother stood up and said, your son is torturous to my son. And another mother stood up and said, my son wants to kill himself because of your son. And I said, they said, we couldn't believe you were having a bullying talk. That's why half of us are all here. We couldn't believe that you were having a bullying talk. And so, since then, it was a long road, a lot of struggles with his ADHD and trying to find a diagnosis and care and all these things. And, he ended up ultimately going on to Lawrence School, which turned his life around. And I'm proud to say that he is an asset to his community. He has overcome. When he came home that day, he said, so how was your little bullying talk, Mom? And I'm like, it was really good. It was supposed to end at noon, and people were still at my house at 3:30. And because it allowed a lot of mothers to pop up and say, your child's been bullied, my child was we couldn't have accomplished that at the school. So it was meant to be at my house. And a lot of healing, and those moms that I spoke to, there were 3 moms that my son had targeted some kids, and we vowed to make things better on both sides, and we did. And when he came home and he asked me how my little bullying talk was, I said it was really great. I just met a lot of new friends, and I said, I found out something today. I found out that you're a bully. And what he said just shocked me. He said, finally, you figured it out. Mom, I'm stuck in it. I mean, it all started with just horsing around, and now I have all these people that count on me every day to pick on these kids. They love watching, they love, and he said, I can't stop. Every day I lay in bed and I say, I'm not gonna do it again tomorrow. And I do. And he explained to me why the bus. And so he couldn't go, I go, do you think you can't go to school tomorrow and act totally different? He goes, I can't, I've tried. So we did ultimately have to end up changing schools because he couldn't overcome his own expectations that he had set up for himself. And thank God I found out about Lawrence School in our backyard, and that is where he did his high school, and he went in there at the 9th grade and graduated from Lawrence School. And he has completed a 4-year college, and he is gainfully employed here in Cleveland. He just bought a house 2 weeks ago, and he is so my hero because he has overcome so much. And he has apologized to almost all of them. He has made amends to almost all of them and is friends with those kids today. So it's worked out, but it was quite the journey.
You see this a lot?
Yeah, well, actually, I don't really deal as much with the bullies as the victims, but that's such a touching, moving story. I'm so glad you're here. So my name is Carolyn Ievers-Landis. I'm a pediatric psychologist at Rainbow, and I'm coming to this from several different directions. I'm the psychologist for Healthy Kids, Healthy Weight, which is the weight loss program at Rainbow. So I see a lot of overweight and obese kids who talk to me about being bullied. But I also see a lot of overweight and obese kids who are not bullied at all. So I always ask them, why is that? And they tell me their secrets of why they're not bullied. So I can share some of that. And then I do work with kids clinically and do research on kids with chronic illnesses. So I see a lot of kids that are a little bit different because they might have cystic fibrosis or sickle cell disease or that sort of thing. I can bring that to bear too. And I do a lot of therapy also. And I do work with kids who are bullied. And I also have an 11-year-old and a 12-year-old child. So I've gone through this with them as we go through school.
So I run the Center for Research on Girls at Laurel School in Shaker Heights. And I'm also a psychologist in private practice. And in thinking about bullying and how we can have a conversation that I think is a useful and productive one, what I have found is that it's important when we look at difficulties among children to separate out day-to-day conflict that kids have with each other from bullying. That the reality is that children are in school all day, all year, with other children they didn't choose. And as a function of that, they're going to run into conflict with each other. They're not born with fabulous conflict resolution skills that they can just roll out when the time comes. And I think of conflict in some ways as sort of the common cold of being a human being. You know, it happens, we don't like it, we can't seem to stamp it out. There are things we can do to make it better. There are things we can do to prevent it, and we can talk about those. But it's a reality of life. I separate that out in my thinking from bullying, which is, you know, what we're describing, where one child is victimizing another child who is unable to defend themselves. And I think, you know, in this case, I would say, well, that's more like pneumonia. You know, it's serious, it's very dangerous, it has to be treated, you have to step in, somebody has to do something, you can't ignore it, you can't hope it goes away. And I think we do our best work. Our job, you know, what we want to do is to help. And I think we do our best work when we make the proper diagnosis on the front end, and then we can have treatments that are effective. So if we treat everything like the common cold, if we just say, yeah, well, kids don't get along, we're going to miss some very scary, very frightening, severe situations that need to be addressed. And if we treat everything like pneumonia, you know, if we say, well, you know, so-and-so said one bad thing to my child, she's being bullied, you know, we're going to actually poorly treat situations that need to be treated in a different way. So I think as we have this conversation tonight, one of the things we want to sort out is what's day-to-day conflict between children, which absolutely is something we want to help them with, and what's bullying, because how we help as parents and schools looks very different for those two.
Don't forget to, if you have the index cards and you have a specific question you'd like to ask, we'll be taking those questions. If you just raise your hand a little bit, Stephanie will be coming around to pick those up. And we'll get to those probably in about 15 minutes or so we have a good 45 minutes to kind of go over all of your questions. That's why we brought these panelists here, so they can answer those questions for you. We kind of brainstormed on a few different scenarios, some typical things that might come up with a child, whether it's a school setting or a home setting or just a play setting. I'd like to kind of throw some of those out to you guys, and just feel free to jump in, whoever may have an opinion on this. I'll try and direct them as best I can. Let's start. Parents are interfering, and even on occasion getting involved in the bullying. Kid reports to her mom that another kid was bullying her, so the mom starts posting nasty comments on Facebook about a kid. Parents can get involved, and I don't know why parents are as catty as their own children, but sometimes they tend to be. I assume that you will probably have seen things like this through your experience at schools.
I can't say that I've seen a specific experience of a parent necessarily engaging in the bullying behavior, but certainly parents engaging in a way that fans the flames. Okay. And increases the likelihood that the child will continue to be victimized, increases the likelihood that they will be isolated in the school setting. And by no means am I saying this is a battle that should be fought only by the children, particularly if it's bullying behavior. Obviously, you need to bring in the adults, but the adults need to come in a way that is rational and calm and effective and filled with information for those in the school setting or in whatever setting that allows those folks to intervene successfully. The more that's presented to us, the more we can do in solving the problem or in helping the students to resolve the issue together, which is the primary goal.
If a person, though, is doing that, they're probably not very likely to, one, admit that they're doing it, secondly, be willing to discuss it in a calm manner. So the question is then, how do you get a parent who you feel is being negative towards a child or fanning the flames, so to speak, to maybe come into the office or come into the center and say, you've got a problem too, and you're only making it worse for your child?
I kind of wanted to piggyback upon what Jason was saying a little bit and then get to that. I think every parent, and we all have the experience when your child is bullied, that you become so furious and you just see red, and that's your first, the first thought that you want to do something to kind of get even. I mean, that's kind of a base reaction that we all have. And you have to kind of process that and step back and think, number one, you don't know the whole story. Like you were saying, you don't know what was going on behind the scenes, why this one child did that. And I think as parents, we have to speak to our kids. We have to talk to them and find out what's going on. And then we have to fact find and talk to other people rather than attacking or accusing. We have to figure out, this is what I saw, or this is what I heard, what's going on, this is what my child told me. And gather all those facts before jumping on that bandwagon. And for that parent, it sounds like that parent reacted from that gut level, the mama bear, I have to do something and attack. So I think that to, if that was something that I knew that one of my, patients' parents did, I would kind of process it with them in terms of that. Like, I can see why you went there, and kind of talk, well, what did that feel like? And what do you think that's going to do in terms of helping or hurting your child? And I think most people probably regret that, I would hope, maybe not, and then think to themselves, this is going to hurt my child. And what can they do when their child did to make amends and fix it? Because that's a pretty big mess up. So
Let me follow up with Facebook, because as great as some people think it is, it's become a tool for bullies. And it's become a tool for people to post things. And a lot of times parents aren't aware. A lot of times maybe parents don't care. How do you limit social media, and how do you help your child get through that if, one, they're a victim, or if they are a bully and they're doing these things?
Huge. I mean, this could be a 7-hour topic. I think, for starters, there should be some expectation that if your child's on social media, you are on social media with them. My position on this has actually softened a bit over the years, because I think, I had a 13-year-old in my practice make this incredibly excellent argument for why she did not want her mother on Facebook. And she said, it's not that we're doing anything wrong, but I'm talking about who has a crush on who, and then they're going to come over to the house, and then you're going to know who they are. And so the solution we made was that the uncle who lives in California is in charge of monitoring her Facebook. And she was totally fine with this. The mom, trusts her brother. And it was, I felt like, a very effective solution. So I would say up to a certain age, first of all, your children should not be on Facebook under 13, no matter what anyway. But if your child really pushes back, I would consider the possibility of trading Facebook supervision duties with someone you love and trust, and just saying this is the minimum expectation. So I think having adults on Facebook is, first and foremost, absolutely essential. And it's not because kids are bad. It's because kids are impulsive. And if I think about all of the impulses I ever had between 7th and 12th grade, and the fact that I am so lucky there was no way for me to act on them immediately in a permanent record, I think that that's what kids are up against. So when we look at having adults sort of lingering on Facebook, whether it's your uncle in California or if you still let your mom on it, what they act as is speed bumps. It's not that we're going to turn them into angels, or we want to turn them into angels. I mean, they're teenagers. They get to be real people. But we want them to think, ooh, I'm about to do this, but my uncle's going to see it, so I'm not going to do it. They need something that slows it down. So adult monitoring no matter what on Facebook, but I've become more flexible about who that adult might be, because I think kids are allowed to also have social lives, and by and large they do it on Facebook.
And I agree. I want to say something quick about Instagram also, which is like the latest big thing. I think one thing, I agree, you have to monitor it, or somebody has to monitor it, some adult. And what's neat about Instagram, though, is I've seen a lot of cases where someone will start bullying a kid and put like, you're ugly or something, and then all the upstanders or bystanders will jump in and say, oh no, you're pretty, oh that was mean, and all these things. So they're kind of sticking up for each other. I've seen a ton of that behavior, and it makes me feel really good. And there's other things where they'll have this thing called haters will hate. I don't know if you guys have seen that, where it's like, hey, people are going to pick on me, but we're all going to be okay. We're going to hang in there together. So I feel like there is a good use for it also.
Just to add on to that, as a school, from a school perspective, I think it's important to note, related to the social media, that rarely now in a school setting do I have actual bullying going on in the school, where it's happening right in the building, in front of faculty, in front of other students. What I do have is cyberbullying. I will get reports, it was posted on Facebook, somebody took this picture and put it on. There's text messages, there are phone calls, there are anonymous voicemails. This is the way the bullying is happening, and these are the things that we're needing to respond to. So as Lisa said, please make sure you're monitoring, someone is monitoring what's going on, because that, I think, is almost more damaging than what happens face to face. Sometimes it's anonymous. There's no way to respond to it. There's no way to stop it. There's a constant fear of who it was. It could have been anyone if there was no name associated with it, or if it's a fake name associated with someone else. So that monitoring is critically important.
And I want to add, speaking about, Lisa had talked about, trying to distinguish between bullying and just behavior. And exclusion is something that leads to the thought that someone's bullying you. I brought up an example when we were meeting that, sometimes kids think just because the most popular kid in the school never says hi to them and they make eye contact, he figures he hates them, that whole crowd hates them, and then it turns into a bullying thing when no one ever threw a punch and no one may have ever made a statement. And so the problem that I have with Facebook is that a lot of pictures get posted and kids find that they were not included in an event or whatever when they thought that they most certainly would have made the A-list. And, and teaching our kids, like I do not allow my daughter to post things like that. And if she wants to post pictures that she took, she has to select that they only get seen by the group of friends that were there, because feelings get so hurt. We've been on the other end of it, where she'll just be like, they all got together and they all made up something that they were doing in babysitting. And here, some mom said only 6 girls, but she knew that 8 of them were friends, but limiting it. And, she was beginning to feel as if she was being bullied. And she was just being excluded, but it's the same kind of hurt, I think. And of course, then I'm like, I'm so mad. Like, how could this mother not be watching what's going on, or how could she not know? And I have a 3-day rule. I don't do anything for 3 days. And it's the gift of hindsight, because you could even write down what you would have said, send it to yourself, and go, oh my God, thank God I did not send that. Because those are not the words I would have chosen. I was really hurt, and I was sick. You actually get very sick at that point yourself. And so that's the problem I have. So if there's a message to be said about that too, is the fact that exclusion leads to a lot of hurt feelings. And yeah, I'm not crazy about Facebook at all, needless to say.
Let me move on to Jill, your example. If the office is on the bus, why don't the bus drivers do anything? Does the bus driver know? The bus driver's got to see what's going on. I mean, I know they're trying to drive, but they know. Should there be monitors on the bus? Do we need to go that far? Do the bus drivers then report to the schools and say, hey, I saw this going on and steps are taken? Or are the bus drivers kind of in their own world and they just take the kids around and they just drop them off and that's it?
Well, we tried to get, again, we were going to be using volunteer parents to ride the bus. And then it got a little gnarly because there was energy there that was probably not very healthy. And so then we nixed that in about 10 days. The bus driver doesn't see it all, because Stephen was a silent killer. You know what I mean? He would, he got into the point where he was even threatening to do things to their mothers and their sisters. And, one day he walked into school and somebody sucker punched him, and all these teachers saw, and they instantly took the kid that hit my son and brought him into the office, and they called me to say, oh, your son was sucker punched by this boy, and but he's out of the school and he's suspended for the next 6 days, but you might want to have your son, you're taken to a dentist or something like that, whatever. And I'm like, wait a minute. Somehow, some way, Stephen threw the first punch. It either was in an email last night or something like that. I want him suspended too. And they're like, no, we're good. I go, no, I want him suspended too. He needs to be, we'll figure it out, but I don't want this treated differently, because there's a cause and effect in a lot of cases. And it was true, it was a threat that he made to do something to this boy's sister in an email. And, Stephen just gets empowered by that keyboard. That keyboard was like, nothing, like he was able to hide behind it or what have you. And it was dangerous. And all that was going on, and I had no idea.
Sorry.
I think there's a couple points here. Back on the, if there's stuff happening on digital media that's inappropriate, it's so helpful if parents take screenshots of what they're seeing online. And if you don't know how to take a screenshot, Google, how do I take a screenshot? And it'll come right up. Because I know sometimes on the school side, parents will come in and say, this is happening, that is happening. And then when they go to find it and give us documentation, there's nothing there. So I would say document, and then take it to the school first as a way to start in a neutral place about what you're seeing. With regard to the question about the bus and what should happen, when we talk about not being helpless in the face of bullying, there has been years of research about bullying prevention, and the leader in this is a guy named Dan Olweus, and it's pronounced Olweus, but it's spelled O-L-W-E-U-S, and I think he's Norwegian. I'm looking at Jason because they've got this fantastic program, bullying prevention program, that Lawrence has done an amazing job of implementing. And part of what the Olveus program requires, and I'm not paid by Olveus, I mean, I like research, they've got the best research. They start by actually taking a survey of all the children in the school about bullying behavior. What's happening, where it's happening, frequency, all of those things. And so any school that's involved with this actually starts first with a data set of where the troubles are. So some schools it may be the bus, other schools it may be the locker room, other schools it may be the far, far edge of the playground. And one of the first things that Olveus requires is you put more grown-ups in those places. But I think it's not something that has to be done intuitively or guessing. You know, that there are systematic ways to get children to tell you what's happening where, and then to put more grown-ups in those places.
What was that one for you?
It's worked remarkably well. And I think one of the points to putting the grown-ups in the space is excellent and absolutely part of it. But as far as bus monitors and those kinds of things, you can add more adults to a situation, won't change the behavior unless those adults are trained in how to intervene. Bus drivers are not trained, by and large, how to intervene on bullying. They are trained how to drive a bus safely, as they should be. Teachers are not trained on how to intervene in bullying behavior. They are trained how to teach math, how to manage a classroom. Intervening on bullying behavior is different. So you must train those people, and all of the people in schools, in agencies, in organizations where children are present in order to intervene successfully. And you can do that through the Olveus Bullying Prevention Program. You can do it through other research-based interventions. When we did Olveus at Lawrence, the bus drivers were part of that. The custodial staff was part of that. The secretarial staff was part of that, so that everyone knows how to do those things. And it's not difficult to learn how to do it. And once you have the language and the skills and the confidence to do it, it becomes a habit of mind that is very easy, I think, to implement.
Can all schools do this? Is this an expensive program? How extensive is the training?
All schools can do it. However, schools cannot do it independently. Most schools have parent-teacher organizations that do a really nice job in fundraising. They have built some awesome playgrounds that I have seen. But I would encourage those same organizations to direct some of that funding toward bullying prevention, toward the implementation of the Olveus Bullying Prevention Program. It is not inexpensive. It is not easy in terms of time and commitment and organization and follow-through. But parent-teacher organizations that have the funding and the time and the parent support to do that can make an enormous difference in their school environments in a relatively short period of time. We're in our 6th year of implementation, and every year we see our bullying rates go down. Didn't happen in the first year. Happened a little bit in the second. And then in the third, we started to see it. So you have to do it and stay with it.
Question for Lisa. Kids being kids. You talked about the conflicts that happen every day. There's a lot of, and for me, and I'm not sure where the bullying starts age-wise, but it seems to be that just in general, it seems middle school is the place where it starts. Would that be an accurate representation?
I would say you start to see significant bullying in middle school.
Kids are developing, hormones are changing. It's just a time when, and these are some of the excuses that come out. It's just their hormones, it's boys, it's girls, it's the kids being kids. How do you start to notice that, and when is it kids being kids versus really, really bullying?
Well, in terms of starting to notice it, I think one of the things that just universally makes middle school so hard, I think that all of us, when our children head into 7th grade, we just get this, there's something about 7th grade in and of itself that feels so daunting. I think that just normal developmentally, the problem with 7th grade is that kids catch on to how to use and abuse social power, but they don't have the perspective of why they may or may not want to do that yet. So the capacity to use and abuse social power outpaces any reasonable thinking about whether or not I should. There was a New Yorker cartoon I saw a million years ago of these two guys walking up Capitol Hill, and one is saying to the other, well, how do you know you have power if you don't abuse it? And I think that's 7th grade, like right there, that is 7th grade. So I think that's when you're going to see it start. There's a lot we can do to try to help kids with that. They need a lot of support. They need a lot of adult coaching about how they're going to conduct themselves with each other. We can get into more detail on that. I think, when to worry, right? When to say this is not just yucky 7th grade, regular 7th grade, is when a child's being victimized, when a child cannot protect themselves. I also worry terribly about children who do not have friends. I think that we have to accept that meanness, unfortunately, is going to happen in a school day. And it happened in our school days, it's always going to happen in a school day. It is one thing to be subject to meanness when you have 3 friends who can come in and say, it's okay, we love you, she's not that nice, we got your back. It is another thing to be subject to meanness and to be all alone having to contend with that. So I think as we think about ways to protect children, one is to make every effort we can to prevent bullying. The other is to make every effort we can to make sure that every child is connected to some other child in their classroom. It's the isolated kids who worry me the most.
It's tough to have a child go, you need to be friends with Bob. You're his friend now. Well,
Yeah.
Easier said than done.
And I
think.
agree, and I want to piggyback upon that, and that it might not even be within the classroom or within the school, but someone outside. It could be a church group, it could be a drama group. The kid might be a little quirky, and they have to find their peeps out there somewhere, and you can help them find them. And once they have that group of accepting people, they can make it through the school day, even if they were bullied, and they can call up their peeps or text or whatever later. So that's what you have to do, is kind of bolster them and give them that social support.
And this is where I'll stick up for Facebook, because I have some children I work with where, they have kids they like okay at school, but they love their camp friends, and so they go home and then they're on Facebook all evening with their friends in California and their friends in New York, and obviously I'm talking about a fairly privileged segment of kids here, but for them, they can share everything. They don't have to worry that it's going to get back to the kids in class. So Facebook has its upsides. I can't believe I'm saying it, but it does.
We're going to get your questions here in just a couple of minutes, but I want to touch on something that Carolyn talked about, some of the secrets that those students or children have to make sure they don't get bullied, even though they would be a typical
right.
person who you would expect might be bullied.
That's right. I know. I think it's really interesting when we see Kids for Healthy Kids Healthy Weight, we do an evaluation, and one of the things we ask them is, are you teased or bullying? And I always try to think ahead of time, I wonder if this kid is teased or bullying, and they're all overweight or obese. I am really bad at figuring it out. And it's not based upon, yes, there's some literature that shows, if you're obese, you're more likely to be bullied. But some of these kids are very different looking, quirky, whatever, and they are not bullied. So I ask them, what's your secret? And the main things they tell me is they're funny, they're confident, they might have a lot of friends. Those are the sorts of things that they are just not bullied at all. They just have this aura around them. And I'm like, can we package that and give it to other kids? How can we get other kids that? So again, it's funny, it's self-confident, it's having friends, also physically being large. That actually is self-protective for boys and girls sometimes. And people are kind of afraid to mess with them. And that's not such a bad thing, to be kind of imposing. Not that you've ever, knocked someone out, but you're kind of there and not to be messed with. So.
We're about halfway through, and I want to make sure we get to your questions. If you have not had a chance to get a question written on an index card and you want to do that, just raise your hand, and I think we have a few that Sue and Stephanie are going to collect. In the meantime, I wanted to throw one more thing out while we're collecting these cards. Kids who pretend to be friends, but they're mocking them. You have a child who maybe has an emotional disability, who may be really, really wanting to have a friend, and they come into contact with somebody and they're your best friend in the world, but behind their back, they're not at all. How do you deal with that, and how do you explain to the child that they're not really your friend? Do you give them that harsh reality, or do you try and let them figure it out on their own? What do you do?
I think from the perspective of a school for students with special needs, we do educate around what the qualities of a friend are. These are the things that friends will typically do. Is this friend doing that for you? And helping the students make the connection between, okay, this is a true friend, this is one who maybe isn't, and hoping they'll make that connection as we go along in the discussion, that maybe this one is not the right person. If they don't, often we will educate for them. These are some of the things that are being said, and a friend probably wouldn't say those things to you. You have to do it gently, but you can do it in order that they don't continue to be victimized even without their knowledge.
And Todd, what I've seen too is that sometimes they're really nice to the person, and the person has no idea that behind their back they're saying these horrible things. And I think in that situation, it's up to us as parents. I hear about it as a parent. And as kids to figure out, hey, we need to let this know that you cannot just go around trash talking people, but being their best friend to them, because there will be consequences and it will get back to that person, and your reputation is on the line as well. So I think, and it's hard to like think about calling a parent or calling a kid on that. It's uncomfortable. But I think, again, we step back, do the 3-day rule, think, hey, this kid is doing this, and let's tell someone. Let's not keep it a secret and help that continue on.
I think a twist on that you think would be easier to deal with but may be just as hard is that I think sometimes when girls are not being kind to each other, the research tells us that the girl who is least nice is also the girl who's most likely to share secrets and tell intimate stories to the girl to whom she's been unkind 2 days before. So what you see this pattern sometimes of girls where they're not nice, they're excluding, they're telling rumors, things like that, but then the next day they'll say, come join us, come be with us, come play with us. I hear this is my favorite eraser, you can have it. And so it's very confusing for the child on the receiving end, that sometimes this child's really nice and sometimes this child's really nasty. And I think as parents, what we want to listen for is when a child comes home and says, Susie was so mean to me today. And we say, stay away from Susie. Don't play with Susie. You've got other good friends. Go play with other kids. And you think, okay, good, I've solved it as a parent. And then she comes back 3 days later and she goes, you wouldn't believe it, Susie was mean to me again. And you think, didn't I tell you to stay away from Susie? And I think that what we don't do, and what the research findings have helped me to know to do, is to say, tell me about what it's like with Susie when she's not being mean to you. And often, if you dig a little deeper, they'll say, she's so fun, and she tells me secrets, and she shares her stuff. And then we're in a position to have a more helpful conversation, which is to say, look, there are nice to you all the time friends, and there are nice to you sometime friends. And you deserve to have nice to you all the time friends. And Susie's not one of those. So let's strategize about how you're going to handle it when she comes your way being nice again. Because it's very hard for children to turn away somebody who's being kind to them. And it may not be that they say, I know that tomorrow you're going to turn and show the other cheek, But they may be realistic. May think, okay, Susie's in a good mood today, I'll play with her today, I have no expectations about tomorrow. But I think that kind of strategizing I have found to be much more useful when parents dig a little deeper and get past just hearing about when Susie's mean, because kids tend to only report that side of the story.
I think that's a really good point. I just want to piggyback really quick on that, is that when kids are saying that something's like hot and cold in a court, girls are kind of notorious for this. And you have to think, what is this kid going through? And sometimes you can talk a little bit about empathy. Sometimes there's an issue in the home and there's something going on, and you can think to yourself, like, are we all perfect as friends? No, we're not. And sometimes your friends won't be perfect, but is it more on the bad side or more on the good side? How much are you willing to put up with? There's not like a clear, yes, you're my friend, you're totally wonderful all the time, and no, you're not, you're horrible. That's kind of in between with most people.
Well, and then the other thing, and I'm going to quote Michael Thompson, who's a wonderful psychologist, I heard him give a talk, and he said, the other thing that happens is Jenny may be taking it on Monday and Wednesday, but she's given it on Tuesday and Thursday. And so I think as much as the child may come and say, Susie was being so mean to me, it's also worth saying, how are you treating Susie? Yeah. Is there more give and take here than you are reporting out at home?
Let me get to some of your questions, because we have some really good ones here. How can I encourage my child or children to be brave enough to stand up for another child who is being bullied? We saw a great example in that film, and they were being told, make friends with that, support those kids. It's difficult to do, especially with social groups and peer pressure. If you associate yourself with somebody who's being bullied, then you may end up being on the wrong end.
One time I had put a post up on Facebook through the Attention Center, and I had said that, as a parent, if you know that there are some children that are being ignored, or they might be a little different, quirky, whatever, and most likely they're not having friends over and such. If you do know that, why don't you commit to having that child over one day a month? Doesn't mean it has to be every single day or part of his group or whatever, but just extending an invitation. Let them say yes or no, but just teaching your child, even if your child says, oh, you gotta be kidding me, I'm really gonna have, and explain to them why. And I think that you could turn your kids into kind-hearted. I had such great responses saying thank you for saying that. And that's my kid. Our phone never rings. And, especially to the kid that's always being bullied, there's usually someone below him in that social status at school that might long to be his friend. He's looking for the popular ones, but doesn't realize that he has a level of popularity to some other kids that, he could be friends with as well.
My son is afraid
Actually,
of
I'm going to jump on that.
please.
As a parent,
Yeah.
I've made a rule that, that my expectation is that my children will be polite to everyone, and I can come back to why I use polite, and that if they see somebody else being bullied, they have to do one of three things. They either have to ask the child who's being victimized to just come play with them, because they may not feel like it's safe or reasonable to say, hey, stop bullying my friend, but you can say, come be with us, right, to the child who's being mistreated. They do that, or stand up to the bully if they feel like that's a possibility, or go get an adult right away. And that I have said, that is the expectation, and I do not care about how you feel about the child who's being victimized. That may be the child you like least in your class. That is absolutely our expectation. So I would encourage families to just make that rule, that this is how you're going to conduct yourself at school.
I think that's a good point, and that way it kind of keeps that code of silence. It breaks that, so that if something's happening in your child's classroom, on the bus, or whatever, you hear about it. It might not be to your child, but you hear about it, and you can let people know about it.
My son is afraid of retribution from his bullies. He says, Mom, please don't make it worse for me. So how do you approach a bully's parents, or even should you? Should you take that step? And I know we discussed that a little bit. You met most of your
I
most of
know,
the parents.
so I was like,
I mean, they came out.
I could have been tarred and feathered very easily, there's no doubt, for having the demon seed. But if there's anything that I take from that whole experience is that I never was not my kid. I have to realize that it took a lot for that mother to call, that she hemmed and hawed. What should we do, honey? I'm sure it went on for months before the phone call was actually made. And if, I said to them, why didn't you ever call me? And they're like, because you were from Gilmore Academy. We had moved over from Gilmore to Chagrin, and, we didn't really know you. And, but I must not have appeared approachable, or no one knew of me. People were asking, do you know anything about her? Do you think she's someone you can call and talk to? I would have been on the receiving end. I would have done, I think, a bang-up job of saying, okay, because obviously she wouldn't want to make it up and call and have to put herself through all of that. So I think to be able to be approachable and to be teachable as well to the whole process, because we don't always know the right exact thing to do. Like listening to those choices, I wish I had my kids all little again, and I want to say, okay, here's what we're going to do, because that is just great advice for that situation.
And I think that's a really good question, in that we don't always want to call the parent. It really depends upon the situation, and every single bullying situation is different. And you want to listen to your kids, because if you run out and call a parent every time they tell you about bullying, they're not going to tell you about bullying anymore. So you have to really make sure that this is the one. We really have to talk to somebody about it, and talk and kind of problem solve with your kid about what's the best thing that can happen, what's the worst thing that can happen, how can I approach this person? You can also approach if you decide we have to do it. Let's say your kid is refusing to go to school, their grades are dropping, there's issues, you're like, I have to address this. Then tell your child, I'm going to do this in a calm way. I'm going to talk to the parent and say, there's some issues, it seems like our kids aren't getting along, this is what I've heard, what have you been told? Let's figure out, what can we do? How can we work together so life is better for our kids? And not just like, your kid did this to mine sort of mindset. And I think if you tell your kid, this is how I'm going to approach it, your kid will feel a little bit better about it. And usually, the bullying, hopefully won't get worse, but if it does, then you're going to have to go up to the next step and talk to teachers, principals, whatever.
A couple sort of takes on that. One is, I think approaching another parent, I would think maybe depending on the context of the relationship you already have with that parent, would be helpful. If you don't know the parent or are unsure of it, I would encourage parents to write down what their child is saying and actually check with the school. Say, this is what we're hearing at home. Does this match, what you're hearing at school? I will tell you very often, I think it happens that the child says at home, oh my gosh, this child's making me crazy. And you call and the teacher says, I'm watching them play at recess together right now. What comes home does not always match what actually happens. So I would check first. The other thing I would not underestimate is how much relief kids get by just dumping stuff on their parents. And I think that this really starts to amplify through middle school. I think one of the things I've really come to appreciate is that by middle school, I think children increasingly share their day by complaining about their day to their parent. And I think this is a great solution that kids come up with, because I think they want to tell you about what's happened, but they don't want to seem babyish about it. So I think that rather than getting in the car and saying, and then this happened, and that happened, and that happened, they say, oh my gosh, this happened, and then this person drove me crazy, and this person tortured me 3 hours, and then this happened. And they've told you about their day, and yet they don't feel like babies. And because we love them, we're thinking, oh my God, this is horrible. I mean, every day you're getting in the car and you're reporting, one litany of horrible events after another. And I think there's two things we can do to check how we should react. One is, does your child seem to feel better when done? Do they do it and then you feel terrible and then they go off and are in a really good mood? It worked, right? You've done your job, they are good to go. If you're still not sure, you can say, do you just need to dump, or do you want my help with this? And it is incredible how consistently kids will say, they'll tell you the truth. And most of the time, they will say, I just need to dump. And then you can relax and think, okay, good, just lay it on me. I do not have to start thinking about how I'm going to get her phone number and all of these things. And it takes you off the hook, and it lets them do what they need to do. But I think, if we followed our kids through a school day and had to be in school all day long, in class, with all of the kids, we would be at the end of our rope at the end of the day. And kids really hold it together, really beautifully. And to be able to get home and tell you about the kid who was picking their nose and the kid who, and just unload it is how they can actually pull themselves back together and go back in the next day and be good humans. Mm-hmm. So I think don't mind the complaining, don't see that as a problem unless the child doesn't feel better after doing it, unless the child says, yes, please help me, or if the child's clearly suffering, or if it goes on, if the 3-day rule and your child's still suffering 3 days later, then start to check in with the school and say, is this what we're hearing? Is this what you're seeing?
A few questions on a kind of a similar thing, but these are for the kids that don't open up. For the kids who, something's going on.
Yes.
You can tell. You can feel it. You're a parent, you know your kid. How do you get a child to open up to you when you suspect something's going on? Do you get the school involved? Is it a counselor? Do you do it? Is it Uncle Jim, on Facebook, who sends a message? How do you, without being too invasive into your child's privacy, help them?
I think one of the things that we found to be really successful in a school setting is to contact the kids the way they contact each other and ask those questions. If I pull a student into my office and say, you look upset, let's talk about those feelings, no one's talking to me. And it's going to go around the middle school and no one will talk to me for the rest of the week about what went on in there. But if I email a student and I say, looks like some things are going on that might not be the way we need them to be. If you feel like you want to talk to somebody about that, these are the folks who might be available. Or if I text message a student, you looked bothered at the end of the day. What's going on? Depends on the relationship you have with the child, but if you can connect with them the way they connect with their peers, you can get into that network and learn all kinds of interesting things.
I would just call school and ask. Mm-hmm. Just say, this is Susie's mom. She just doesn't seem herself. Is there something going on at school that I don't know about? Part of the real pleasure and honor for me of getting to work in collaboration with Laurel School is to be with teachers and to appreciate, these are people who love kids and who know more about kids than I, in all my training, will ever know about kids. And they are really invested, and they really, very rarely do you come across a teacher who is not incredibly invested in children. And they also can see your child in the perspective of all the 5th graders and give you a really useful read. So I think you could just place a call and say, look, Susie doesn't know I'm calling. Is everything okay? And they can have so much information.
A couple of questions on Mean Girls and mean girl behavior. You do one of these? Is that just
No, I want to.
You want to talk? Okay. So the question is for you specifically. I know you do work with girls. Is mean girl behavior learned, or is it born with? How can you raise your daughter's self-esteem when her group of friends are dumping on her? She's made new friends, but has low self-esteem because of the previous group of friends. So, Mean Girls.
Okay, so the reason I make the face, I think I'm a little annoyed about the movie Mean Girls because I feel like it gave this reputation.
Well, it was horrible. That's right.
Well, and it seems like girls have the market cornered on meanness. When you look at data, again, back to the research, and it's not that I want to dump on boys. I just want to stick up for reality. Boys are more aggressive than girls psychologically and physically. They engage in almost all kinds of bullying more frequently than girls do. Boys bully boys and girls bully only girls. I mean, so I want to just say, just as a general context, it's actually not accurate. But, okay, so girls can be mean, right? I mean, within that, girls can be mean. Here's where I think the reputation becomes somewhat deserved, right, in terms of the intensity with which girls can be mean. When you look at boys and girls and how they manage distress, one of the things we see is that boys manage distress by distracting themselves. So if Billy's upset, he'll go call somebody and play basketball, and it kind of goes away. Girls manage distress by discussing things, and they discuss and discuss and discuss, and they call 14 girls, and they have these great conversations, or don't, but they somehow just talk and talk. In doing this, girls start to develop a very, very well-developed sense of empathy, understanding of social relationships, understanding of how humans interact with each other, in a way that boys do not keep up with until later in development, right? I mean, girls are they're making more of a study of it. When they choose to be mean, they are better at it, right? They may take this highly developed sense, and then, so, boys may throw more punches, girls may choose just the right word that is going to take somebody to their knees. So, again, everybody does it differently, but I think that that's why girls can get this reputation of it, is that they're very accurate in how to be mean. So then what to do about it? I think one of the things that we need to allow in girls is that they actually don't have to like everybody. We do not expect them to like everybody. That would be ridiculous. I think that sometimes girls get mean because we give the impression that they should like everybody all the time and be real sweethearts. I think it is helpful to say to girls, you're not going to like everybody. I expect you to be polite to everybody. You can come home and complain to me about who you don't like. You can have somebody you were friends with one year and you grow in different directions. That doesn't mean you've made a mistake. That doesn't mean she's made a mistake. You've just changed. That's allowed. I think girls feel like that's not allowed. If you're friends with somebody one year, you're being awful and disloyal if you're not friends with her the next year. I think we need to give them more permission that that's normative. But we also just need to give them room to, have girls they don't like, and that's okay. They just can't act on it in impolite ways.
Why don't we reward empathic children the way we reward athletic or academic achievement? There are no scholarships for being an empathic student, as far as I know. But obviously, there needs to be some praise so you can continue that behavior and show that it's positive.
I'm going to take a break because I just really went on.
No. I can talk about this. So I agree. I mean, obviously, our society prizes athletic ability, appearance, that sort of thing, as opposed to people that are kind. I mean, kindness isn't high up there. But I think over the long haul, that is what gets people the closest relationships. So they are rewarded, but maybe not in the short haul. And a lot of those kids might have a smaller group of friends. Like some of the really popular kids might have lots of more superficial friends, and these more empathic kids will usually have a smaller group of closer friends. So that is how they're rewarded in the depth of their relationships. And I think as a parent, we can really praise them for that and point out to them the ways that they are kind. In fact, I just saw a little patient today in therapy, a 4-year-old, and her mom was telling me how empathic she is with her little sister and with people that came over to the house were crying. And we were praising for her, even at the age of 4, like, wow, that person was crying and you went up and you hugged her and you asked her if she needed anything. That is so neat. You're such a kind person. So I think we as parents and, as other people need to notice that and praise that, as opposed to you're such a fast runner, blah, 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 all that, or you're so pretty, that too, but you are kind, and that's awesome.
How did you work with your son on that?
Well, I couldn't do it, actually. He had gotten himself in so deep that we tried. We took probably the equivalent of, he got sucker punched on the second day of 9th grade, and then I had him suspended for a couple days. That was actually the suspension that he had a hard time getting into Lawrence because he had. And we explained it was a mommy suspension. The principal was like, that was not our suspension, that was mother's. We couldn't. We got in so deep. So he was so stuck in it that he truly could not. I think others were calling him like a wuss and, you know, all these kind of other things, and he really had a hard time, and he just said, I can't go to school anymore. I can't even take the bus now. He didn't even, and he told me the reason why I always had to take the bus was that he was afraid that kids on the bus would say, oh, thank God Stephen didn't show up today, and now everyone's going to be safe and everyone's going to be fine. He didn't want that kind of conversation taking place. So ultimately, Lawrence School had just provided a very safe environment for him and for everybody. It wasn't even so much that it was a second chance, it was the school's environment that really came. We stood at a turning point when Stephen started at Lawrence, and it really saved him.
Is that part of your program?
I wouldn't say that
your program, but
right. No, I wouldn't say that the training in empathy is a specific goal. Not even goal, a specific aspect of what we're doing. But it is the culture shift that people are talking about related to bullying. We need a cultural shift, we need a change. This is how you do it, by creating environments in which being empathic, being kind, being caring is rewarded, celebrated, understood, and expected. That this is simply what we do. It is not something that you have to strive for, or something that you will get rewards for, or something you'll be penalized for not doing, but it is simply who we are as this environment. Empathic people working together to protect peers and each other from whatever difficulties may emerge. So to the extent that as communities you can work with your schools to develop programs like Oveus or whatever, you will begin to develop that empathic community that will really change the culture of environments where kids congregate.
do schools have clubs or organizations that can work on conflict skills, conflict management?
Yes, there are excellent programs that you can use for conflict resolution. Peer mediation models can be very effective, where instead of the adults come in with the solution to the problem and then profess that solution and send everyone off to implement it, you have kids together come up with a solution. And there's a facilitated process for that, and it's just not something that happens accidentally, but the kids can work together to figure out where things went wrong in the process and what each of them could have done so they didn't get there, and then what they will do going forward so that we can prevent this from happening again. And it is a very powerful intervention that does not require any more time of school or professionals than it would to bring each kid into the room separately, get everybody's story. Your story doesn't align with his story, let's try again. All of that doesn't take any more time to put them together to work through it. Now, if you have a true power imbalance in a bullying situation where one is victimized, you do not use peer mediation. That's totally inappropriate. But when we have the conflicts that we've talked about, then yes, a mediation approach is very effective.
So how do you get your school to do that?
That is probably a little bit easier to do than to implement a full-scale bullying prevention program. There are curriculums written around peer mediation. There are training programs that are very accessible, those kinds of things. So I think that may be a starting point for intervention if you can't go all the way toward a full implementation of Oveus.
My kid says, I just don't get involved when I ask him what he does when he sees a kid getting bullied. So how do I encourage him to be an upstanding citizen? How do I encourage that behavior?
I think the most important thing for kids to know in order to become active bystanders or upstanders, is the term that's been used tonight, is to know that you have their back. They must know that if they step out and do that you will have their back. And they must know that the adults in the school environment will also support that. If those two things are not clearly in place and they don't feel it, then it's going to be very difficult to do. So you're saying, I'm behind you, and they're not feeling it, and you're asking at the school, well, who would support you if you decided to do that, and they can't name anybody, then they're not ready for that, in my opinion. But if they have those two things in place and can tell you, yes, I know you will support me, I know, Mr. Cook at school will support me, then it's time for them to move in that direction.
Where do you go for help if your disabled child is being bullied? Obviously, disabilities cover a wide spectrum, be it physical or mental or emotional. And your school obviously specializes with that, and you've had a program, but if there's a school out there where there's a child in a wheelchair, or there's a child who's in a special education program, how do you help that?
Ohio has a bullying prevention law. It's illegal for a school to allow bullying in Ohio. So if you feel that your child is being bullied in the school, talk to the school, and if you feel like they're not acting on it, start moving up, right? So start with the teacher. If that doesn't happen, go to the principal. If that doesn't happen, go to the superintendent. Both out of being, good humans, they should step up, and if that doesn't do it, then the law is requiring them to step up.
Yeah.
When we think about bullying prevention, I know that a key part of LVEA is immediate and real consequences, but I also think the next step is to think a bit more about what's going on. How is this child finding themselves in this position? How can we get them out of this position? Are they, showing us at school what they are on the receiving end of at home? I think those are the kinds of questions we should be asking. But that child actually is always suffering.
And I think there's a level of immaturity that starts it all. They're trying to be something that they're not, so it's that overage. And then, that they can't, they're not mature enough to get themselves out of it. So, because that takes real maturity, and that takes real, being teachable, that's the other thing. And at the time, my son was pretty defiant, and he was arrogant, and, I knew that kind of stuff was going on, but he generally was pretty kind, I thought. I had just he had $1 million smile that used to get him in trouble all the time. But he was quite immature. He is to this day, actually. He is 23 years old, and he's really at about 18 or 19, truth be told. And it's kind of like as if you quit growing from the point in which you started socially acting out. Kind of like they say, once you start drinking and it becomes a drinking problem, wherever you started at, you haven't grown at all, so when you sober up, you're at that age. That I could speak to Stephen about. That when it all came together, he had a level of, it was obvious that he had not grown those years that he was doing it. And it actually went on for about 3 years. At Gilmore, part of the reason why we left, I never understood why we left. And no one said anything, and we just decided to back out, and they were glad to say goodbye to us. And I don't know what happened there, but I do know that there were he got into trouble, but they would never tell us why. They were protecting who Stephen was bullying. And be that good or be that bad, it was weird to have your kid home on school suspension and wondering, like, okay, what did he do wrong? And he's not talking, and, whatever. And so, and they do get stuck in it. They do get stuck in it.
Just today, my 5th grade daughter overheard some girls making fun of another child at her school. How should I talk to her about this? Should I encourage her to stand up for this other child? I think that lends itself a little bit to is that a small conflict? What were they saying? Or is it, them attacking one particular girl?
I think it goes back to what we discussed earlier about as to whether or not the child should stand up. Does the child have your backing and know that? Does the child have the school's backing and know that? And how likely is it if that child goes into that situation that they will also be aggressed upon? And if that's a risk, you have to think very carefully about that. If that's less of a risk and they have those back supports, then going in and intervening can be helpful. But even the situation of approaching the girl that they were talking about, including her socially, as was discussed earlier, may be enough of a message that it's unacceptable to your daughter without having to do a direct intervention.
I also think that when children report things like that at home, what they are looking for us is just for us to say, it's not okay for them to be doing that. You were sitting next to it, it felt wrong to you, you're right, it is wrong, I'm glad you knew it was wrong. And maybe there's more to be doing, but sometimes I think they just want to hear it said again, and that is often quite enough. Or even to say, yeah, your coach is a jerk. I think for kids, they think, okay, well, good, I'm not crazy, and I'll go deal with him. But I think that they want the world to work in one way, and when it doesn't work in the way they want it to work, they need our support to say, yeah, you're saying it right, and it's not always what we wish it were. And that goes much further than I think we realize it does.
And I think also in terms of that, is this a pattern? Is this girl being talked about a lot, or is this just a one-time incident? And ask your daughter, is this something, are they always picking on this girl? Do you hear this a lot? Because then at some point you're thinking to yourself and with your daughter, well, what do you want to do? Let's brainstorm some possibilities. What could you do? Like you've given them the 3 choices. Or is it something that you could even mention to the teacher, email the teacher, I hear X is happening in your classroom. And I bet a lot of teachers would love to get a little heads up email, like they can't have eyes on the back of their head. They don't know everything that's going on in the classroom, and kind of let them know and stand up for the kid.
Another question was, what can teachers then do to help out? Especially if they're not maybe trained in the, in the bullying course.
Well, I think in order for teachers to help, they must be aware. They must be aware that something is happening. It's an unrealistic expectation to think that a teacher will see everything, will know everything, will be able to sense when bullying behavior is going on. So it needs to be reported by the student, by the parent, by someone, so that they can begin to intervene. And as Lisa said earlier, schools are full of caring people who will watch, who will supervise, who will intervene, and may go as far as to talk to the two and determine, how can we work this out? Maybe they're partners in labs and shouldn't be. Simple things that can begin to help them work through the problem.
So what would you suggest then? Because, for example, because my son
Yeah.
came home, he played football. He goes, "Yeah, I was the team captain. We picked teams today."
I
But it was
would-
on the playground.
I would contact the principal and say, why are you still doing this?
Well, I don't think
Why?
it was just on the playground. It was a
Oh,
pickup
on the
game.
playground. Oh, well.
Oh, that's different.
Yeah,
under
that's a little
control.
bit different, yeah. So you can talk to him about, hey, what was that like? And if he was a team captain, maybe you could say, hey, don't just always pick the kids that you know are the best. Why don't you try to give so-and-so a chance or so-and-so a chance? How would you feel if you were always the last one? Try to give them some empathy like that.
Are some children born or raised with key characteristics that enables them to shrug off being bullied? You talked about some of the secrets earlier.
Right.
Or is that child that acts like it doesn't matter in denial? And maybe being oblivious sometimes is a good thing too.
Could be all right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know about the born or raised. I mean, I think that often it's a child who feels confident, regardless of, sort of outside appearances. I think we can't underestimate how much a child's own sense of themselves sends a message for how they may be treated. And yet, at the same time, I don't want to get into anything that would feel like blaming the victim. That sometimes, kids go after kids who really have done nothing in any way that would invite or provoke that poor treatment. And again, that's where I would just say having friends is critical. And actually, back to your point earlier about having a couple really excellent friends versus large groups of friends, when we look at the research on that, the happiest middle schoolers have one or two good friends. And that as kids rise in popularity, they become more stressed. That maintaining many, many social connections is actually exhausting for kids, because if you call Susie, then Jenny will find out you called Susie first, and then she'll feel left out. And so that even though children aspire to popularity, and some parents aspire for their children for popularity, what we consistently find is if you got one or two good buddies, you are good to go. That'll get you through, and not to worry beyond that.
And I think there is something to be said for having that thick skin and teaching your kids about that. And we talked about not every little slight, every little thing. You have to say, you need to toughen up. You need to let some of this like water off a duck's back. And how can you do that for your child? How can they maybe understand what the motivation was behind the mean comment or the thing, and say, hey, that kid was having a bad day. Or I feel sorry for that kid that they have to be mean to me to feel good about themselves or something, and just kind of go about their day. So that's what, we want these thick skins for our kids, because they're going to need that for their whole life.
I think some of that also can come to modeling of behavior as parents. In terms of when we have a situation that's frustrating at work, or we have someone who makes an unpleasant comment, and your child sees you get really reactive to that, and then be irritable with them and stay that way for a couple of days, that may be the pattern that but if they see you say, yeah, you know what, he was in a bad mood, it was a bad day, I'm moving on. And then you can complain all night long to your spouse after the kids go to college.
Right, yeah, exactly.
If that's what you really need to do.
Right.
But while your kids are up, they need to see you having that resilience, or making the differentiation between, I can have the resilience, but this really was aggressive or hurtful, and I need to address it in a different way.
And I think that's great. And you talked about family dinner times earlier, and I think that's such a great point, that sometimes within families, as you guys all know, kids bully kids, or adults bully kids, or parents bully each other. So what are we doing within our own setting? And you know how kids are always kind of picking on each other, but sometimes is there a real power differential where one of your kid is getting hammered by another? What can you do to change that dynamic? Because that is not okay either. And it's,
When you
They
see,
call it sibling rivalry, but
Yeah.
sometimes it is much more.
yeah.
well, and when you see some pretty sophisticated bullying behavior in elementary school grades, it is almost invariably the youngest child in a series of siblings. Some child who has learned all the rules at home for how to work kids over because they've been on the receiving end. So they'll be the third or fourth grader who knows how to run all sorts of cruelty through a class. And these poor only children or first children have no idea what's going on, because this child is a master because they've been trained by their siblings.
It's the kick the dog phenomenon
Yeah.
too, because they're picked on at home and then they go and pick on other kids at school. That happens.
I
Yeah.
think when kids bring stuff home, Part of what we need to do in our response as parents is model a matter-of-fact acceptance of some of the harsh realities of life. You know, so if they say, "Oh, Susie doesn't like me," you can say, "Yeah, you don't like Susie. Like, you're just gonna have to find a way to get along with her until you guys graduate from high school." And it's not just the words that you say, but it's also the music, the tone, you know what, tough noogies, you're gonna figure it out. That comfort sort of communicates to them, this is not a crisis. And at 14, I know to you it feels like a crisis, but I can tell you at 42, it is not a crisis, and that's helpful to them. That's really helpful because 14-year-olds have no perspective. And so for you to not get caught up in a 14-year-old's view of the world is really important.
We just have a couple of minutes left. Yeah.
You brought up a great point about families, and then you said, so you have to do something about it. Do you have any suggestions for what families can do in these situations?
In terms of stopping that bullying behavior? Right. Well, I think that in families there has to be a certain expectation about things like no name calling of each other and consequences if you hear name calling in terms of, you know, you need to go to your room, you're not calling your sister fat or stupid or, you know, whatever other names. We don't call each other names. I mean, that needs to be a ground rule. And I think a lot of families, you hear that over and over. And think about that internal dialogue that's part of your kids' system after a while, after you've been called nerdy or fat or ugly by your sibling for for years and years. So that needs to be a very strict rule in households. And in terms of modeling how you speak to your spouse and how respectful you are, and just expecting the pleases and the thank yous and the level of respect. You're not going to be perfect, but how can you argue in a way that is civil, and how can you listen to each other? And, you know, practice, like we're talking about empathy in your own family, and talk about reflective listening, or how can you understand what the other person is saying. So if you need family counseling, or if your child needs counseling to work on those, that's the sort of thing psychologists do or therapists do to help with that.
I think it's interesting too, when in family situations, what may be going on is legitimate bullying, and to identify it in that way between siblings. Often we'll say it's sibling rivalry, or don't do that, or don't talk that way. So I'll use a personal story. I have a 7-year-old, female, feisty, and who can be very aggressive toward her brother. And we've had all the consequences. We've talked about this, and not to talk that way, and that's not what we talk in our family. And so finally, in a move of desperation that worked, I said, you know, if you talked like that at school, at my school, I would consider that bullying. And this is the consequence you would get. Poof, never happened again. We're 4 weeks in, stay tuned.
Yeah, I was going to say, good luck.
But by simply identifying that with that word, that we've talked about at home, we don't bully people, we don't do that, that's not how we behave at school, I don't ever want to hear that, change that behavior pattern. I'm not suggesting you label all sibling rivalry as bullying, but if it rises to that level, ongoing power imbalance, all those things, sometimes the identification can change a pattern.
At the Attention Center, I just have to share briefly, is that, you know, we're a fairly new center that's working with families and adults and children with ADHD and all the symptoms that are associated with it. And we have coaching, which I love that department of coaching, because it's not therapy and it's just kind of dead on, as long as you have really good trained, certified coaches. And we just started doing siblings. So whenever the one's coming in who has ADHD, the sibling doesn't, but they're fighting like crazy and the parents can't stand it, our psychologist had suggested that they have a couple of sessions with Saul, and because a parent can't correct it, you know, a father can't, a mother can't, it's just not the same coming. And it is amazing, the changes. People, they call and say, we're just going to stay with Saul forever. And I'm like, well, that's not the game plan at the Attention Center. We want to empower you and have you move on so that the others can come in. And so we're not about long-term care. And they get like, well, we love it. We're so afraid it'll stop, that it's making a real difference. Now, I'm not quite sure what goes on in that room with Saul, but anybody who's really having a problem in that area, feel free to call the Attention Center and ask to speak to Saul. Because I'm sure he can give you, he always has great words of wisdom, and he's a great coach. He's a great coach.
We're about to wrap up. Sue Borson is going to say a few words before we go. I just want to give you guys a quick 30 seconds. What do you hope people take away from this tonight? What's your real message for parents to help deal with this issue?
I think the most important thing to recognize is that in collaboration with your schools, beginning at your family, moving out into the community and the people with whom you have influence and relationships, and taking that forward into the school community, you can make a real difference in the behaviors, in the culture, in the level of empathy going on in those school environments that will help to bring down, if not altogether eliminate, in many cases, the kinds of behaviors that we've been talking about tonight and the things that cause the greatest harm to our students. It is a difficult problem. I don't mean to minimize that in any way, but it is solvable.
Moms, take care of yourself. You know, I think part of my reason for not being able to see Steven's behavior is that we were still struggling with this learning disability that he had and how awful he felt about himself. And I had gotten myself so worked up into a daily tizzy, not sleeping at night or whatever, and my health was failing. I have to believe that if the mommy's okay, everybody's okay. So stay strong, take time for yourself, put yourself in time out, and nurture yourself. And that is a very important message.
And I'd like to say, as a psychologist, I mean, talk to your children, listen to them, most importantly, listen to them, know their friends, know the stories of what's going on in their lives, try to get to know as many other parents as you can, so you have a network of people that you know and can go to more easily, so it's not so daunting. And just be there when your kid wants to talk, like in the car or loading the dishwasher or whatever. Just try to be present for your child and don't always be hooked up to your devices or running off doing this or that.
That's what I was going to say. I think, again, you know, back to the research. When we look at research about what's good for kids, parents are good for kids. Spending time with parents is good for kids. So I think we don't want children always with each other, away from adults, online or in person. I think that having dinner as a family as many nights a week as you can pull it off is incredibly valuable. I think having, you know, a Friday night movie night or a Friday night go out to dinner night and making that just a real ritual in your family, that when we see things devolve with children, it is because they've moved further and further and further away from adults. And that regular check-in, being with your child, driving them places, having something that you do as a routine is actually the single best preventative of things going awry. And if things start to go awry, you are going to know so much sooner because you've made this regular commitment to be with your child.
What a round of applause for our panelists tonight.